Good. So now we're going to apply what we learned, or we're going to bring with us the wisdom of the story of Babel into what we were talking about yesterday and what we will talk about today, which is the notion of the theory of modernization. So let's review. What are some connections now that you've read the story of Babel between the theory of modernization, the worldview behind the theory of modernization, and the culture of Babel? Let's see if some of you can make this connection now. How is the Enlightenment? How is this idea of progress? How is the modern mindset, right, which is behind the theory of modernization, similar to the mindset of the Babelians? Can anyone start to make some of these connections? Uwinesa, go ahead.
Yeah, people were thinking they are now together. They came from east to west. They are now together, and they were thinking, as they have the same language, they can do something together. So they said, let us build this Tower of Babel. So they were thinking, because they have power, they have a good idea, they can do something together.
Okay, so how are the people, right? We were talking about the West, right, who had this light and they wanted to share the light. How are they similar in the way that they shared their light, right, which we talked about yesterday? How is their method, the way they do it, the way they're sharing the light, how is it similar to what Babel is about? Let's remember, how does the West think that progress can occur? So the West is talking to, let's say, a non-Western country and is saying, okay, if you want to be civilized, what is the condition of being civilized according to the West, according to the theory of modernization? Adamovich, go ahead.
So theory of modernization says that if you want to be civilized, you have to be like us. That's Western view. So story of Babel also tell us that people wanted to be the same.
Very good. You got it, right? The same mentality of everyone has to be like us. We have to have one language, our language, right? There is no room for your language, your culture, your religion. If you want to succeed, right, you need to speak our language. This is the mentality of Babel, right? Certainly Babel, when it says one language, one language, one language, meaning if you want to be with us, you need to speak that language, right? You can't come with your language, right? So I hope you can see how the story of Babel is really the story of the West, right? The Western mentality of everyone has to be like us, right? Everyone has to follow us. Everyone has to imitate us. There has to be only one language in Algeria, French. Only one language in Congo, French. Only one language in Ghana, English, right? And so forth. And so this is the idea, right? That we see how the West has fallen into this temptation of Babel, right? At least as far as it's this idea that everyone has to be like us. We have to speak French or English and learn French culture and follow American government, right? Follow American form of government, American form of economics, right? And so this is where we can see the warning of the story of Babel to the West, is saying, be careful, right? What you're doing is not good. You're destroying diversity. And when you destroy diversity, you're weakening humankind, right? We'll talk about this with Senghor, who talks about how diversity strengthens humankind, right? So what we're learning from the Tower of Babel is you are weakening humankind by wanting to be the only ones with the light. Are you following what I'm doing here? Put your hand in the screen, right? We need to start connecting, right? The biblical narrative to life. Okay, so we saw this problem, right, with the theory of modernization. And of course, now we have also the backlash, which we're going to study, which is what I call the postmodern shift, right? So this is point 2, the postmodern shift. Remember, there's 4 points we're going to talk about. I'm reminding you here. We have the theory of modernization. We have the postmodern shift. And then we have post-development. And finally, the African way, right? So that's the plan for today. So we're now in the postmodern shift. So this shift we mentioned before when we talked about postmodern ethics, right? When we talked about the modern ethics, which is you love the citizen. And now we're entering into the postmodern shift where you love the stranger. Remember, we talked about this briefly. So I'm going to bring this again with a little more detail. Again, with the, and first I'm going to start with the question, what caused the shift from modern, right? From the modern theory of modernization to the postmodern, what caused the shift? And we have a beautiful quote here from a French philosopher called Lyotard. He actually is the one who invented the concept of postmodernity, right? And he says this, it is a crime which ushered in postmodernity. Okay, so by the way, if some of you still have questions and you still want to talk about stuff that we did this morning, again, like I said, at the end of the day today, I'm staying about a half hour or more, depending on when we finish, and you can come and we can talk about it together. So you don't have to, you can hold on to those questions and we can discuss them together, one-on-one after when class ends. Okay, so it is a crime which ushered in postmodernity, right? And the crime, of course, that he's talking about is the Holocaust, which occurred during World War II, right? For any of you who don't know, right, the Holocaust is the name we have given to the genocide of the Jews, right, during World War II by the Germans, right? Okay. So it's 6 million, right? 6 million Jews in the space of a few months completely exterminated, right? So this horrible event shook the foundations of the European psyche, right? So it's not just that, you know, it happened and then everything went back to normal. No, Europeans were completely traumatized by what they were capable of doing, right? So they began to reflect. And there's actually, right after the war, there's a group of German intellectuals, right, which formed a discussion group called the Circle of Frankfurt. Frankfurt is a city in Germany. So they got together and they sat down and they said, we need to think about what just happened, right? How did we, and you have to remember, Germany was not some barbaric nation in the backlands or backwoods of Europe. Germany was the most civilized nation of Europe. Germany is where philosophy came from. Germany is where music was happening. Germany is where the Protestant Reformation took place, right? Germany was it was the head. It was one of the most advanced countries of Europe. And yet this is the country that fell into the deepest form of barbaric behavior, into the deepest darkness, right? And so these intellectuals got together, and you have a couple which are well known in the philosophical world, Adorno and Horkheimer, who were part of this, right? You don't need to know these names, but in case you want to go deeper, right? So these two guys, right, they got together and with us, some other people, and they started to think about how is it that we Germans, civilized, we allowed this evil to take over our minds and our bodies, right? What is it that made us so evil, right? So they're thinking about it, and there's two possible answers, right? Number one, the Holocaust was an accident. It happened, we don't know why, it was an accident of history, right? We don't know why it happened. It's a kind of a flaw in the system, right? When you have a computer and it's a virus foreign. But the other option was the Holocaust was the normal consequence of the Western philosophical mindset, right? And this is the option that they opted for, right? For them, the Holocaust was not an accident. It was the fruit of a certain way of thinking, in the West. Okay, so everybody follows me so far, right? So they're saying the Holocaust is not just an accident. They're saying actually it's connected to a certain way that we have been thinking, And this is why now we have it. So remind me, we talked about this, the modern ethics, postmodern ethics. And we talked about the theory of modernization. So now you have an idea of the Western mindset before the Holocaust, right? Modern ethics, theory of modernization. What's the mindset of Europeans before World War II, which might have given rise to the Holocaust? Let's see if you can remember. What's the flaw in the way of thinking that would have facilitated, made a straight way for the Holocaust to happen? What was missing in the European psyche before World War II? Now that you know modern ethics, you know the theory of modernization.
Love of strangers.
Exactly, right? The modern mindset is a mindset which is completely oblivious to the concept of the stranger. Let me write this down, right? The problem with the modern mindset, and we saw this both in modern ethics and in the theory of modernization. The problem is that it is completely oblivious to the concept of the stranger. It has no concept that the stranger matters. Remember modern ethics? What mattered in modern ethics? What are we who are we responsible for in the modern context of ethics? Let's remember from day one. Who are we?
Fellow citizen.
Exactly, right? Fellow citizens, right? What matters is taking care of each other. So if someone is not a citizen, it's not my problem. A lot of us still thinking like this. A lot of countries still thinking like this, stuck in the modern era, not understood the shift, right? So, and then we saw yesterday also with the theory of modernization, this idea that we're the best, we're the only ones, you're nothing, right? You are primitive, barbaric. I mean, look at the text by Condorcet, right? We have a whole vocabulary. Let's go back, right? Condorcet is saying savage, barbaric, ignorant, uncivilized, right? This is anyone who is not like us immediately becomes low, right? So again, you see the mindset, and it's not, you know, it's not a evil, right? I mean, Condorcet is a nice guy. We saw, right? He's a nice guy. He wants to help, but he doesn't have a concept that what is different from him might still be good. For Condorcet and most Western mindsets, if you're different, you're automatically inferior, right? So you can see how the main flaw of the Western psychology is this complete unawareness that the other might have value, that the other matters, right? So that's why the intellectuals who gathered during the Circle of Frankfurt, and the two of which, the most important ones, Adorno and Horkheimer, are saying, you see, this is why when the Holocaust happened, we let it happen. Because we had no concept of the stranger, and that the stranger matters, and that the stranger is important for our society. We didn't know. We had a blind spot. And that's why the Holocaust was actually a natural consequence of that mindset, right? Are you following, everybody? Okay, so if you want to go deeper into what they wrote, Adorno and Horkheimer, you can explore the book, The Dialectic of the Enlightenment. This is the book that they wrote about this, right? That this is deep philosophy, only if you really want. Okay, so now, of course, so this is the postmodern shift. So with the postmodern shift, you have this collective European awakening to the importance of the stranger. And you really have a genuine awakening in Europe. Not everyone, obviously, because we still see the Europeans pushing out the refugees, right? But we have a lot of people coming into this awareness that the stranger matters and the stranger is valuable, right? And this, of course, and we'll read one of those philosophical voices, right, that are talking about the importance of the other. And so, of course, in the context of the relationship with the non-Western nations, things begin to change, and especially in the context of development. So we'll go there now. Let's just quickly read, though, before, just to end on this philosophical part, the postmodern shift. There's a very interesting quote by Derrida, who is one of the main postmodern philosophers, which will, and if you're familiar with Derrida, let me give you maybe a couple. He's actually, I'll just give you a few words on who he is, right? I always want to do a little biography. Let me find let me find in my notes who this guy is. Okay, so Derrida, he's not in my notes. Great. Anyways, he's actually originally from Algeria, right? But Algeria, remember, was French. I mean, it was a French colony. So he's Jewish. So of course, if you know the history of Algeria, you know that before the French came, you had a huge Jewish population dating from the beginning of the millennium, right? And then you had a huge Muslim population, Arab population, and then the French came, right? So Derrida is actually a native of Algeria who, of course, adopted French culture, moved to France, became a very famous philosopher in the context of postmodernity. And so we're going to read him. Go now to the citations. Let's take a look. This is page 6. I'll give you some time to go to page 6. Page 6, the last quote, very short quote, thank goodness, because it's a kind of complicated quote. Who would like to read this particular quote? Don't make me wait hours like this. Just jump in. Okay, Cole, you're moving. Go ahead, you read the quote. You have it, Cole?
I'm still looking for it, sorry.
All right, good.
Which quote? Which one?
This is the last quote on page 6.
The white man?
Yes, the white man. Go ahead. Go ahead and read.
White man takes his own mythology, the Indo-European mythology, his own logos, that is, the mythos of his idiom, for a universal form which he calls reason.
Okay, let's comment on, let's translate, right? So the white man, by which he means the Western. I prefer to use the concept of Western, personally. So the Western mindset, right? The European or English or American, they take their own mythology, meaning their own worldview, right? Their own logos, meaning logos is a Greek word for language. You should be hearing Babel right now. Babel should be sitting on your shoulder. His own language, his own history, his own worldview, and he takes it for a universal form, meaning everyone should be like this. This is the true language. This is the true worldview. Your worldview doesn't matter. You have to adopt my worldview to really see clearly, right? And then, of course, he calls this, he says that, you know, my worldview is the only rational worldview. Your worldview is stories or, you know, irrational, barbaric. My worldview is the only rational worldview. Basically saying my worldview is the only one who really knows, which really knows the truth, right? So you should be hearing Babel. That's exactly Babel. One language, nothing else, right? So there you have, again, a connection between the postmodern thinkers and the biblical text. It amazes me how postmodern the biblical text is, right? I know that as Christians, we are always criticizing postmodern thought, but we do not realize how postmodern the Bible actually is, right? So here that was kind of just to give you a taste, right, of the shift, the way, the awakening of consciousness, right, in the European continent about how the other might be more important than they thought, right? Now, so now we move into development, the way that development takes place, and we are now closer to what some of you guys are already doing. And this is basically the notion that development has to be not so much imposition, but more of a, you know, we are now going to be more attentive to what these people need or want, right? So Shumko has a point here in the chat. Seems like Europe didn't learn much from World War II 50 years later. The same thing. Well, of course, Rwanda is not Europe, so we're good, right? Shumko. We didn't do it. But to be honest, we did have some part to play, I think, as we know that Europeans are never outside of other people's affairs. So yeah, so no, of course, this is this mindset is not, you know, it's just a few. There is a partial awakening in Europe. What I'm seeing, sadly, in Europe right now is the reaction to the refugees. By the way, Germany seems to have learned the lesson, because you have this clear intention in Germany to welcome as many refugees as possible, right? So I really think that the Germans made a conscious effort to awaken, right? And you have most of Western Europe, most of the parts of Europe that were under that suffered under the Nazis are actually now much more conscious about the importance of welcoming in the stranger, the refugees, accepting the other, right? But you have now rising voices in these European countries that sound very close to the Nazi voices, right? So there is a kind of a tension, right? Very good, absolutely. Okay, so back to development, right? So now we have what we have here. When especially, I know not all of you work for NGOs, but most NGOs today, they're not going to come and say, you have to do things our way. Some do, but but most NGOs are going to try to work with the local populations, right? To be attentive to their way of thinking, to their desires, to their version of happiness, to how they would implement the project, right? There's much more of a dialogue and of a respect for the people that are the beneficiaries, right? So you have the experts and the beneficiaries. This is the language of development, but there is a conscious effort to listen to the beneficiary, right? So I want to read a few philosophers in the context of development who have spoken about the importance of listening and receiving from the beneficiaries, not just imposing on the beneficiaries, right? The notion that the beneficiary, the other, might have something to teach me, might have something to share with me, might have their own specific wisdom. They're not complete dummies, right? They have something to share and I need to listen, right? So let's go again to the citations. And I want to go to page 7. You have a few different authors who are thinkers within the context of development. So let's go to page 7. The next to last paragraph, this is the paragraph by Falsborda. This is the text by Falsborda. Who would like to read that particular text? Okay, Apenten, go ahead.
So our objective was to examine and test in a comparative and critical manner the idea that it was possible to produce a serious analytical work based on a practical knowledge of the reality of both the ordinary population and of the activists, which would enrich not only the general fund of science, but also the people's own knowledge and wisdom. Our was to take grassroots knowledge as a starting point, and then to systematize and amplify it through action in collaboration with external agents of change and strengthen the power of formal and informal rural workers' organizations.
Okay, great. So just a few words again on Falsborda, so you can put a face on this person. He's actually working in Colombia, in the country of Colombia, right? So, and there was an attempt. So if you're familiar with the history of Colombia, you had a lot of peasants who were indigenous peasants, right? So you had, Colombia used to be indigenous, obviously. This was a Indian, Native American population, and then the Spaniards came, they took over, they built, a kind of new society. And so the indigenous populations were left to farm they were put on the worst land of the country, and they were very poor farmers, right? And they were kind of put aside and marginalized on the worst kind of territory, and the Spaniards kind of took the rest. So this guy, Falsborda, actually started out as a philosopher, but ended up becoming an activist and working for the cause of these indigenous peasants. So here he's, of course, a thinker, so he's still writing about how to best create progress in his country. So this is the text here. So let me summarize a little bit what the text is saying, because the language is a bit technical. So he's saying, basically he's saying when we try to, it's not even about helping the people knowing what to do and then bringing it to them. It's about figuring out what is the best thing to do, figuring out how to bring progress to his country. And even so, the temptation for us Westerners, and I'm saying we're all Westerners because we work under often the Western, what do you call it, structures or organizations, right? We usually know what the solution is, and then we try to convince the populations, right, the beneficiaries, that our solution is the best one. Here he's saying we should not even know what the solution is. We need to sit down with the local populations, right? He's talking about, that's what he says when he means that serious analytical work, so the solution to the problems of a given country must be based on practical knowledge of two kinds of parties. Number one, the ordinary population. Number two, the activists. So he's saying, right, the solution to a country's problems, right? Let's put it like that. There needs to be two people sitting down and talking together, the activists and the locals, right? They need to be sitting down together and figuring out together what is the solution. A lot of NGOs don't do that, right? They go and they diagnose the problem alone. They say, there's a widespread disease. We know that we need to vaccinate. So we know the solution. So we go in and we try to overcome the resistance of the beneficiaries, and then we give them the solution. But here, Falsborda is saying, even when it comes to figuring out what is the solution, what needs to be done, we need to sit down together. And he says this, that in a way, this sitting down together would enrich both parties, right? Not only the local population will be enriched, but also the activists will learn from the local population, right? He's saying here that the general fund of science, but also the people's own knowledge and wisdom, there's a mutual enrichment when we sit down and talk together, right, about this. So, so basically it leads us to, based on this text, we come up with three different ways of approaching a problem, right? And this is called, in his language, the participatory action research. I don't know if you've learned about this, participatory action research. This is a term by Falsborda, right? So this is how he proposes that an NGO needs to address the given problems. There are three steps that every NGO, he believes, needs to take to address a given problem in a way that is respectful of the local population. So point one, he says that first of all, in the diagnostic of the problem, there needs to be, right, we need to be looking at not only what we think is wrong, but what they think is wrong. So we need to be attentive, I can't talk and write at the same time, attentive to not just what we think is wrong, but to the needs as expressed by the local populations, by locals, right? So the diagnostic is not just we enter and we take a look and we decide, this and this and this needs to be done. No, we sit down with the locals, the population, the local population, and we listen to them. What do you think your village needs? What do you think your family needs? What do you desire, right? So at the moment of the diagnostic, we are already in dialogue, right? Then we get to the second level, which is the level of the project conception. Again, here we work together, right? So in other words, when we try to figure out the solution, we think together, right? In other words, we are sensitive not only to what we think would be the right thing, but we are sensitive to the local populations. I'm trying to write and talk at the same time. The local population's own concept of happiness, right? So very often when we conceive a project, right, we are thinking what would make us feel good, what would make us happy. But we need to actually be more attuned to what is their concept of happiness? What do they think will make them happy? And then based on that, we conceive the solution or the project, right? And finally, the last stage he talks about is implementation. Even there, we need to be together. Implementation, in other words, we need to build the thing together, build together, work together. It's not us sweeping down into the village and bringing, like, you know, big savior is the solution. No, we are building this thing together, right? Okay. Let me give you a funny story. I'm sure most of you know this story. It's such a popular story. Before I tell the story, is everyone clear on what I'm talking about? Put your hand in the screen if you're with me. Okay, so here's a funny story that shows a massive, what do you call it? Failure of a project, of a given project. So you'll tell me afterwards if you're familiar with the story, if you knew the story. So this is a village where, so the NGO is working in this village, and they notice that the women every day have to walk for miles to get water. Anybody know this story or can anticipate where I'm going? Put your hand in the screen if you know where I'm going. Okay, a few of you know this, right? They had to walk for miles. And so the NGO is thinking, wow, those poor women, right? They have to walk so far away and carry this water. They're wasting so much time. They could be more efficient. So they say, we're going to build a well in the village. So they build a well, and, you know, they're all proud of their well. And, you know, they come back a few months later to see how everything is going. And the well is completely unused. Nobody touched the well. Women continue to go. And so now they're thinking, we put all this money in this well and nobody's using it. What's happening? So finally they sit down with women, and the women tell them, well, you know, actually we were happy walking the 5 miles to the stream because this is the only time we had to ourselves, away from the children, away from the husband. And this is the time where we could really talk together and try to resolve some problems, relationship problems. And so we were happy. We liked that, the fact that we had to walk so far away. So we didn't want your well. So this is a perfect example, right? And it's a true story of a massive failure because of the lack of communication and working together with the local population, right? Okay. Any questions so far? Oh, by the way, how many of you knew this story now that I finished telling it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. So at least I told it a new way for a few people. Okay, any questions before we go to a couple other texts still on this topic? Questions or comments or things that you feel connect, experiences you have that connect to what we've just been talking about? No, silence. Cole, go ahead.
Participatory is idea and nice, but expensive and will take so long.
Why do you say that?
It takes so long for discussion and negotiation, and it's costly.
Well, you have to think also, I think a lot of the discussions take long when we have a prior idea, right? And we're trying to convince. Then yes, it's going to take long. But I wonder if it wouldn't be much faster to sit down and be like, what do you want? Do you see what I'm saying, the difference? Many times the NGO, they go into negotiations for a long time. Why? Because they have a fixed idea what they want and they're trying to convince. And there's resistance. Am I making sense? Do you see what I'm saying? Cool. So it's not really what Falsborda is talking about. Falsborda is saying we sit down and we listen to them. What do you want? It's going to go very fast if we do that. Okay, we want this. All right, let's, right? But because we are only, see, most NGOs have already fixed idea what they want. And so it's just, what do you call it? When you're make believe, it's, somebody help me find that word. When you're doing something for fake to look good. What's the word for that I'm looking for? It's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, they're just doing it because they know they have to do it because we are in a new
false pretense.
Yeah, something like that. Thanks, Rod, right? It's something like we know we're supposed to be dialoguing, but deep down we don't want to, right? We already know what these guys need. And so we go through this fake dialogue And yeah, it's going to take a long time because it's not a real dialogue, right? So that would be my suggestion. Why it sometimes takes so long is because one of the parties already decided, probably the NGO, what should be done, right? Mansi, you want to add? Go ahead, Mansi.
It's just to add on what you are talking. Most of the NGOs for real are not following what are the needs of the community are. Most of the NGOs, when they come, they have already pre-planned projects. They can just come and say, we are here for watch, we are here for that. And most of the communities, they can request for other needs, and the needs cannot be met. But this is just a principle, but it doesn't work like that in many, many countries. So I don't know, maybe where you are, but here, things are different.
So let me just be clear on what you said. What you're saying is that most NGOs are not following this model, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, right? This is something that, this is very hard, because you should come with a complete open mind, and and this is a true listening, right? You're not coming with and the problem also of many NGOs is the sponsors. The sponsors have a fixed idea what should happen. The money they're giving is for that fixed idea. And so now how are you going to really negotiate? No, you're going to try to push, right? And that's not the real participatory action research, right? Shumko and then Uwineza.
You actually said what I wanted to say. Being an NGO, you have to play lots of different games, or it sounds negative, but basically you have to please the donor, yet implement what's needed. And if you ask people what they want, who will pay for it? So yeah, the tricky part is to get everything aligned, your goals, the beneficiaries' goals, the donor goals, and sometimes they don't even meet, and then you get governments involved, and yeah.
It's if there was really an awakening of consciousness on the sponsors level, right, that their money should, right, there's a kind of an education that's necessary for the sponsors, for the NGOs. I mean, this is what we're doing in this class, right? There needs to be an education that there has to be a true dialogue, right? This is not something the theory of modernization has been, we are shifting away from that. We know we have to. Why? Ethically speaking, we have to. It's an ethical duty to shift away from that, right? There has to be an education of the sponsors. The sponsors are still thinking, I know best because I have the money. No, because you have the money doesn't mean you know best, right? But very often money equals knowledge in a Western mindset, right? Sometimes. Uwineza and then Kolaria.
Yeah, I want just to say that sometimes we think there is no time to consult community, but it doesn't take a long time. Normally in humanitarian, we want to go faster. I want to praise our donor, but now there is, in humanitarian standard, we have community engagement. So there are 4 parts of community engagement. So we need to consult community. We need to analyze their behavior, their beliefs, their social dynamics. Also, we need to plan with them and implement with them. We need also to work with other stakeholders. It doesn't take time. It needs someone mind to hear, to understand community. But if we go in a community and we say we need to build latrines, we found that 40% of latrines we built in humanitarian work are not used, because we think everyone can use the latrine we put in place. But there may be pregnant women, maybe there are people living with handicap, maybe elder people, they can't use those latrines. If we don't have that time to talk with community, we do faster, we show we have 100 latrines, but if they are not used, we are wasting money. In my last mission, we did an exercise on enabler and blocker of community engagement. We find that we need to do a great work with donors, because donors, they say we have a project for 3 months and we need to see 300 latrines. But we don't know what kind of latrine community are using, so we need time to negotiate with them, saying, give us time first to consult community and come back with something that will propose. We should now be able to have that room to change or propose something from the community. It is from us, the people who have been doing project, to make that clear in our project proposal. Otherwise, we are closing ourselves in a project proposal, and we are not really consulting community. Thank you.
Very good. Excellent. That's perfect, exact illustration of what I'm trying to talk about. Uwinesa, go ahead. Wait, we just had Uwinesa. Sorry. There was
Colaria.
Colaria. That's it. Go ahead, Colaria.
Yes. In fact, I wanted to share an example from a project that comes from other Albania, because since we are in the language to the refugees and this kind came in my mind one project that we had with Germany, government of Germany, with returnees. So the people that the Germany cannot anymore afford to the Germany, and they are back to Albania. So before all, we do a need assessment to the community with these people that are returnees. And above all the activities, we find out that they wanted to learn or to keep the German language because they have been there for 2 years or 3, and they wanted to study this language. And when we do the concept note and talk with the GIZ that we have here in Albania about this kind of activity to provide German lessons for this community, they say, no, we don't want them back in Germany. So this is one example how the funds come in a place and how they don't meet the needs of, there are a lot more, but this is an example that I wanted to share.
Excellent example, exactly. So we're very far still from this model, right? The postmodern turn has not completely yet occurred. Kayumba, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're good.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I think that is a good idea you are giving us, that those NGOs should consult the beneficiaries. But also, I think the challenge I can see there is that even those NGO, especially international NGO, they also follow the agenda of donors. Can you hear me? And that agenda of donors, sometimes there is a good agenda, but also sometimes there is a hidden agenda. Because those big donors, most of them, they're business people. And those business people, most of the time they want to create dependency. Yesterday we had to talk about dependence theory. So that dependence theory is that always those big donors, they want always that those people they support, they have always to depend on them. That is why if you try to analyze, for example, I was talking to some local people in some rural area here in Rwanda. One big NGO spent almost 20 years. But when you do research there, in those 20 years, for example, if there is 5-year project, after that 5-year project, people they are more in poverty than before. And also the bad thing, there is a spirit of dependence in their mind. They always think that someone else has to come and help them. So it means that those big NGO, they kill that spirit of self-reliance. They just always, the local people, they always say, for example, this NGO has to come and support us. A donor has to come and support us. They don't use their brain and find their own solutions. So for me, I think those NGO, they have to follow their agenda. Maybe if you discuss with us more about dependence theory, that dependence theory, they sit down and shape it in a clever way so that it can create dependency. That is how the Western now, they want to keep people in power. They want to keep power because they can't, now they can't force people to do what they want. They have to create that dependency so that those poor people, they do what they want, but do it themselves without force. So dependence theory as development actors, all of us, we are studying international development because we are interested in development. It is very important to understand this dependence theory. Otherwise, we will always blame others, but I don't, for me, I don't blame anyone. If you have power, you have to use it. Otherwise, and create that dependence so that you keep that power. Otherwise, other think is the dreams. Thank you.
That is such an excellent summary of the dependency theory, right? Which I skipped, by the way. you noticed. I think you explained this very well, right? And that's, I hope everybody was taking notes. And we're going to actually talk a little more about that in the section on post-development. So we will go even deeper. But I love the way you explained it, and I hope everybody wrote down that one of the main problems of, you know, the whole development how shall I put it, the whole development attitude, right, is this dependency that is created. And you highlighted so well that there is a cause, there is a hidden agenda, which is to hold power over these nations, right? So that was the best explanation of the dependency theory I had heard ever. Thank you, Kayumba, that was great. Great. So let's look at a couple more quotes, unless there's any other, no, none of you are saying anything anymore. So there's a couple more quotes, same idea, right? Let's go to still page 7, same idea of being, working with the local populations. Let's go to the
Professor, sorry. Are you, I don't know whether I'm visible to you there. Are you seeing me?
Yes. Oh, the hands. No, you have to raise your hand virtually for me to see you, because sometimes I don't look at the screen. Do you know how to do that? You have to.
No, here. This one?
No. You have to go. See, this is why y'all have to come to class at the beginning and not miss the beginning. So I don't have to do this again. You need to go to the top right hand of your screen. And you have the option there to raise your hand.
Okay.
We can work on this during the break, but for now, what you can do is put your question in the chat. You know how to chat.
Okay.
Yeah, just put your, because sometimes I don't see you. And unless you raise the hand, the little blue hand that people are raising, this is virtual hand raising.
Because I've been raising my hands, but I don't.
You've been raising your hand all morning. Sorry, Yai. Okay, do you want to say anything since you're here?
Yeah, I was. I think my colleague who spoke before me, I was going to say about the agenda of the donors. Sometimes when the NGO is going to implement any project, sometimes the donor push the NGO on the way they want that money to be used. That is why sometimes you find NGO like tied up, not able to listen to what the community are saying. So this is the point that I was.
Okay. Yes, excellent. Can I get a volunteer to work with Yai to raise his virtual hand during the break? Who would like to help him? Anybody? The eager community of volunteers. Okay, thank you, Uwinesa. Okay, so Yai, during the break, Uwinesa will help you to figure out the hand raising. Anybody else need help with the hand raising? Who else was late? Colaria, are you good? You got this, right? Colaria, can you raise your, yeah, I've seen your hand before. Okay, so whoever else needs, Adamovic, you don't know how to do it?
No.
Okay. So during the break, Adamovic and Yai, you will work with Uwinesa how to do this. Okay. Great. Okay, so here, let's go to the other quote. Do I have time for this other quote? Yes. Let's go to the third quote from the bottom by Alatas. Who would like to read that? I'm just going to randomly call on someone if no one. Okay. Willis, can you read that quote for us? Third quote from the bottom by Alatas. Do you see it? It's good. Now I can catch the people who don't know where we are.
I know where we are.
Okay.
So you say the third quote by?
The quote by Alatas. This is the third from the bottom.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, can you read for us, please?
The call to indigenization is simultaneously a call to the universalization of the social sciences. Mental captivity refers to a way of thinking that is dominated by Western thought in an imitative and critical manner. Among the characteristics of the captive mind are the inability to be creative and raise original problems, the inability to devise original analytical methods, and alienations from the main issues of indigenous society.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's translate this text, right? Indigenization. Let's look at that word. Indigenization. You're all hearing that dog? Okay. So indigenization is basically the idea that we need to think not just with a Western mindset, but also with an indigenous mindset, right? Now, quick question. Can you all hear me above the barking of the dogs outside? Is good? Okay. Because I can barely hear myself. Okay. So indigenization.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Is the idea that we need to be thinking not only as Westerners, but also adopt the indigenous mindset, right? So he says this is how we get to universal truth. That's what he means by universalization of the social sciences. We want to get to universal truth. We want to get to the truth. What is the right thing to do? For that, we need to have not only a Western mindset, but we also need to know how the indigenous are thinking. So this is the idea. And then he talks about how most communities, when they are in contact with the West, they fall into imitative, uncritical approach, right? So they imitate the West uncritically, right? And he's saying we need to move beyond that. We need to move beyond what he calls the captive mind, right? We are not only captive economically, we are captive intellectually. Leopold Senghor will also talk about this, right? So he's saying we need to be able to think for ourselves, right? Manse, I saw your hand. I see your hand. Would you like to add to this?
Yes, I don't want to add, but where are you reading? Which article are you reading? I don't know.
Oh, you know where we are. Okay. I knew some of you were lost. Okay. We are on the page 7, and we are the third paragraph from the bottom. You see it?
From which article?
Page 7 on the citations. Page 7 in the syllabus. Right? We're in the
from the syllabus, the one you sent.
Yeah. Yes, the one I sent.
Oh.
Yes, you have all the text. Okay, welcome, Willis. Welcome. So we have the syllabus. There is some text at the end of the syllabus, and that's what we are reading.
Okay.
Got it? Okay. Willis, you can also stay behind with Uwinesa, who is going to show you if you're still confused. Uwinesa, you will be the mother of the class, okay? You will help them with these issues. Okay, great. Good. So everybody good with any comments on this notion of the captive mind? Anybody want to add anything from their own experience? Have you witnessed this captive mind in your work? This is similar, right, to what we've been saying. Anybody want to add anything? Okay. Good. Let's go to the last text I want to read for this section. Let me make sure it is the last text. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's 2 more. Is there though? Yeah. Okay. Let's go to, actually, let's skip this one. Let's go to page 8. Page 8. Still on the syllabus, right? Go to the second paragraph. And again, this is the same idea, right? So let's see, let me call randomly on people so I know everyone's following. Kigenza, I haven't heard from you in a while. Would you like to read the second paragraph of page 8? This is Blyden. You have it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Second paragraph.
Yeah.
About the foreign virtues.
Yes, you got it. Oh, by the way, just a quick word on Blyden so we can get the terminal. Blyden is, let me say a few words on him. He's born in 1832, so this is an old text, right? Older text, 1832. So you'll see that the language is somewhat old, right? He's actually somebody who was from the Caribbean, and he wanted to actually, yeah, he was interested in forming a colony. For you're aware, of course, that a lot of Africans were enslaved in the Caribbean, and he was talking about bringing the slaves back to Africa, right? So this was the idea that they would be given the land of, I believe, Liberia, and so he was part of this exodus back to Africa from the slaves who were in the Caribbean, and so he was very much interested in the meeting that was going to occur between the African slaves who were familiar with the West and the Africans in Liberia who were not, right? And his idea, it's very interesting, was that the Africans who had had contact with the West, even though they were enslaved, actually would bring new ideas, would bring new vitality to the African continent. So he really believed that the African slaves that came back would revitalize the African continent because of their contact with the West, right? So he wrote about this, but he also then started to notice the effects of colonization on the African continent, and that's where he's writing right now, okay? So go ahead, who was it again? Kigenza, go ahead.
Yeah, the foreign virtues these natives acquire never rise above their parasiticals. Their culture is superficial and its effects artificial, presenting very often an appearance of insanity and absurdity of foreign observer and the pagan of intelligence. The attempt to Europeanize the Negro in Africa will always be profitless task. Thus, he can never bring any assistance to the European. He can never attain to that essence of progress which Miss Herbert Spencer describes as difference. And therefore, he never acquires the self-respect or self-reliance of an independent contributor. He is not an independent, deeply on a subordinate help. In this effort, we struggle with the odds against us. We fight at the advantage which David would have experienced in Saul's armor. The African must advance by methods of his own. He must possess a power distinct from the European.
Okay, very good. This is a very nice text, which probably rings, it connects to a lot of what some of you have been saying, right? This notion of self-reliance, which we've been talking about, right? So basically he's saying, right, what he's observing is the colonial Africa. He's at the time, right? He's writing in the 1800s, right? So he's writing at the time of the colonial era, and he's saying, right, we are trying to Europeanize the African, but he says when we do this, and we'll see this with Senghor, the African will never then be able to find his own wisdom that he can then contribute to the European, right? So he's saying again, this in a way we are impoverishing humankind by making everyone fit within the Western mindset, right? And he's talking about here progress, and he's quoting Herbert Spencer, who was a philosopher at the time, and progress for Herbert Spencer is different, meaning progress is finding your own unique self. That's when it's fulfilling yourself distinctly from others, right? And finally, of course, this notion that the African must advance by methods of his own, and he must, and this is for Kayumba, he must possess a power distinct from that of the European. Okay, great. Now, what we're gonna do, I think you get the idea of what we're trying to do, right? This, just to summarize, right? We are really saying that there's really a postmodern shift, listening to the other, realizing the other has something to say, has something to teach me, not just me, right? Working together to find solutions. So now what I want to do is a fun activity, which you'll do in your breakout groups. I'm going to give you case studies, real case studies, which you will solve. I know the solution already, but you will solve them. And what you're going to do is you have to solve them in the way that we have learned. In other words, you cannot bring some big, heavy Western solution. I want you to solve them by listening to the resource, to the community, and being attentive to the resources that are already there, right? A lot of NGOs, when they come and solve a problem, they bring the huge technological, scientific resources, but often problems are more easily solved, more cheaply solved, here I'm talking to Cole, right? By being attentive to the resources that are already there, being attentive to the wisdom of the community. And often you can find very simple solutions that don't need all of this massive intervention, right? So do you see how I want you to solve these problems? Is everybody clear? You cannot bring some heavy-handed Western solution. I want you to resolve the problem by being attentive to the resources, whether they're environmental or cultural resources that are already there, and then you solve the problem bottom up, not top down. Okay, I'm talking about solving the problem at the grassroots, bottom up level, not top down. Okay, I'm gonna put you in 4 groups again. And so we're gonna have group 1, group 2, you don't know where you are yet, group 3, so take notes for everything, group 4. So you will be, how am I gonna do this? Okay, because I have to divide you, but then I don't know who will be group 1, group 2. I'll tell you, okay? As you get divided, I'll say, so-and-so is group 1, whoever finds themselves with so-and-so is group 1. Does that make sense? Okay, we'll do it like that. Okay, so here's the question, here's the case study for group 1. Take notes for all of them, okay? Because you don't know which one you'll end up. Okay, so this is a very, this is a actual thing that happened. This is in Madagascar. Okay, this something happened in, this is one of the students from IDP told me about this issue. So Madagascar, they had to build some kind of school in a remote place of Madagascar, and the donor had given them only 6 months to do it. Okay, so they had to, so because it's a remote place, they had to bring the construction materials, the wood and so forth from the city, from far away. It was about a 2-hour drive, right, from the city, because it was so remote. And the donor said, you need to finish this by December or some date like that, right? The problem is, during this 6-month period where they had to build the project, it was the rainy season in Madagascar. So the trucks would get completely, they would sink into the roads, which were not paved, they were dirt roads, right, as a remote place. And so they couldn't go fast enough with the trucks because of the rainy season to finish the project on time. What did they end up doing? Okay, that's the first one. And she told me what they ended up doing, but I want you to see, remember, you're doing this by being attentive to the local resources. Remote place, there are no building materials in the remote place, okay? You have to bring them from the city. But the roads, is the rainy season, the donor is inflexible. You have to find a way to get them to that place, and the trucks are not able to move through the roads. That's case study 1. Case study number 2. This is a good, this is also a student told me this one. This is somewhere, where would it be? Where do we have a region in Africa which is semi-desert, sandy? Would Senegal count?
Niger.
Niger, okay, let's do Niger, okay? This was in Niger, let's imagine. So this is semi-arid, it's a desert, you have just a few kind of cactus-like plants, right? And you had a problem with the pregnant women, right? When they would give birth, they would cut the umbilical cord with some razor, which was, and they would not take care of the razor. So the razor sometimes was, what is it called? Rusty. And so there would be infections. The babies would get infected and they would get very sick. So the NGO is working with this problem right now. So they're saying, you know, you need to clean the razors, or no, they're trying to deal with this issue of the razor, right? And the women are not very negligent with these razors, right? So now what can the NGO do by being attentive to the resources there to resolve this problem of the umbilical cord? Okay, case study 3. This one's easy. Vitamin A deficiency. This is actually, I think, the Philippines. You better not be in that group. Hopefully Cole will not be in that group. Philippines, vitamin A deficiency. And again, the community is negligent. We are giving them the supplements, the vitamin A to swallow or chew for the kids, and the women are forgetting and they're losing. So it's a real mess, and the babies are suffering, or children suffering from malnutrition. Again, how can you, by being attentive to the environmental, cultural resources, fix this problem? And finally, this one, to be honest, this is a tricky one. Okay, this last one, this is a tricky one. You have this is Kenya, actually, Kenya. You have herders, some people who herd animals, right? And they have their culture, they've lived there for a while, and the people want to do a coffee plantation. And so they're talking about displacing the herders to put the coffee plantation there. But the herders don't want to move, right? They say, this is our land, you know, this is where we belong, our ancestors were there. Okay, how do you resolve the problem? This is a trick question, okay? You probably won't get it unless you know the story. How do you resolve the problem with these herders who don't want to leave their ancestral land? Again, by being attentive to the cultural and environmental resources. Okay, let's put you in your groups. So listen carefully. Whoever ends up with Kayumba, you are group 1, and whoever is with you is group 1. Okay. How do I do this? Okay. Apenteng, you're group 2. Cole, you're group 3. Colaria, you're group 4. Rod, do you want to join a group?
Not necessary.
Okay. Just checking. Good. Okay, I'm gonna stop.